Hello everyone, this is Chris with Andrews Racing. Today we're going to do what you might consider a simple procedure in the Mopar world, which is installing a valve body on the 904 727 Chrysler torqueflite. Now, while it's a simple procedure, you might be able to pick up a couple of tips or tricks here. Now, you will be probably doing this procedure with the transmission still in the vehicle. So just keep in mind you'll be upside down, you'll have fluid dripping on you, etc. So this is a freshly built transmission, almost ready for delivery. It's a small block Chrysler 904. It's got a low gear set. So we're going to be installing the valve body and a transmission pan, filter extension, things of that nature. So now there's a couple things to take note of. Number one, you want to make sure your neutral safety backup switch is not installed, okay? Because if this is installed, it could give you a little bit of trouble trying to get that valve body in. Another thing to take note of now, depending on what valve body or shift kit valve body you're using, you may install a blocker rod underneath your accumulator. And you want to make sure the blocker rod is the correct height, because if it's not, you could have a problem with the valve body not sitting all the way flush on the sealing surface, and you could have a cross leak. This one has a billet aluminum accumulator with a built-in blocker rod. Now, another thing, the third thing that I wanted to mention to you was you have a parking rod that is installed on the valve body that locks the vehicle in park. There's a park gear on the output shaft that locks into place to keep the vehicle from rolling away. An easy thing to do, if you have long fingers, you could reach back here and you could actually turn this output shaft and you could line this up, okay? And it's real easy to tell once it goes in, and it went in right there. Okay, now that's going to make it very easy for you to get your parking rod with your valve body attached, easier said than done, installed, because keep in mind this is going to be on a valve body when you install it. Now some people will put this in and then install a valve body and then a clip, but I find it a lot easier to do it with the parking rod installed on a valve body, because that way you're not losing the clip inside the transmission. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Alright, now another thing I want to mention to you guys are the tools you will need. You don't need many tools, but you will need a 7/16 socket for the valve body attaching bolts. And I use a torque wrench on every fastener in a transmission, so you need an inch-pound torque wrench. The specification, valve body attaching bolts, 100 inch-pounds. Obviously you need your filter extension, typically a Phillips screwdriver, sometimes a 5/16 on these filter extension attaching screws for your filter. Another thing to take note of, on our transmissions that we build for racers, we stud our transmission pans. And the reason for this is because the frequency interval that the racers are servicing their fluid and filter. The people who race and the people who make a lot of horsepower will be changing their filter quite often, and obviously their fluid. So a fluid will deteriorate with heat. Now, it's a lot easier to place your gasket on. Pardon me while I grab my gasket. You place your reusable gasket on here, and you set your pan on, and is what we use are ARP black oxide washers and ARP 12-point nuts. Now this is a 5/16 by 24 thread pitch, and it's a 12-point design which uses a 3/8 socket. So that makes it a lot easier when you're servicing your transmission. You don't have to line up bolts and start cursing and start stripping out transmission attaching bolt threads. You don't want to do that. So we stud our transmission pans. It works very well. Torque spec on these, 10 foot-pounds. So you will need an additional 3/8 torque wrench for these, okay? Alright, so we're going to be installing the valve body now. like I was saying, you want to guide your parking rod once you have it lined up, which I do, into position. And then you want to line up your shift shaft with the hole. Of course, I need to get rid of my gasket because that was giving me a little bit of trouble. You always put a little transmission assembly lube on your shift shaft. That way you don't cut your seal. So now the valve body is installed. Now you could go ahead and install all of your attaching bolts. When we build transmissions, we clean all of our threads with thread chasers. We don't use taps because taps could enlarge the thread, and you don't want that. Easier than you have a loose fitting bolt. But you can see how easy these bolts are going in. You really shouldn't have to screw these in very hard. They shouldn't be very hard to screw in is what I meant, but you should be able to get these in by hand almost all the way if you've done a good rebuild. We glass bead blast our transmissions from the inside and through the outside, and we thoroughly clean them a number of times, just depending on the level of modifications on the transmission case. And then, like I said, the final procedure is to clean them and then also chase the threads with a chaser, so it makes it that easy. And so you could tell how I'm just able to get all my bolts run down by hand. Okay, now 100 inch-pounds here, I start from the inside out. Okay, that way you don't warp your valve body, you don't warp your attaching your sealing surfaces. Now the Chrysler inherently is a little bit weaker in this area because there's no valve body casting cast into the case like some of the other transmissions like the Chevrolets, TH350 and TH400. So we like to stiffen things up with the cast aluminum pan. We don't like to use the stamped steel pans either. Okay, so but they are inherently a little bit weaker in the middle of the transmission. And like I said, I go from the inside out, as you don't want to warp the valve body. And if you're on the bench, you want to make sure your transmission doesn't fly off the bench when you're doing this. So that's why I have this rubber mallet here. Okay, and I go a couple times, you know, to make sure. One time around. And hopefully you can still hear me. The heater kicked on. That'll shut off here shortly. And there you have it. The valve body is installed. Alright, so now you get your filter. Now that the heater kicked off, and I'll try and stay out of the picture here a little bit better, get your filter and extension and gasket installed. Tighten your screws. You don't have to go overly tight here, but at the same time you don't want your filter to fall off, because when that happens, obviously you won't have any forward or reverse. Okay. Reusable gasket, transmission pan. Okay, this is a cast aluminum pan. Install your washers and your ARP 12-point nuts, torque to 10 foot-pounds, and away you go. Thanks for watching, and have a good day.